Hi there, I'm Frank.
And I'm Jessica.
And welcome to our podcast, Original with Subtitles. Yes, we've rebranded, not just in name, but also in content. So we started this podcast because we spent decades around art and culture, building community, and I'd say perhaps an unhealthy amount of chaos. And we kept meeting people who make us feel something, people who make us think, and we wanted to tell their stories.
And just an excuse to corner somebody at a dinner party and ask inappropriate questions.
That's your expertise, to be sure. Along with the rebrand, we are adding real estate back into the mix. And why? Why, you ask? Because our lovely Jessica has just signed with Sotheby's International Realty in Beverly Hills. Someone's got to pay the bills. And my OnlyFans account is just not getting it done.
Needless to say, both of those things are true. From Hong Kong to Hollywood I go. My passion for unique properties continues. And boy, does LA have some fabulous homes. I'm not sure what I love more, the homes or the people I meet through the process. I mean, just yesterday, walked through a house with 3 Emmys, just, decorating the bookshelf. Pretty cool.
Yeah, LA, true cast of characters. Speaking of characters, on the last podcast, we talked about how I continue to struggle with the podcast format. It's very uncomfortable for me. Jessica suggested, why not try improv? Being in LA, I signed up for an intro to improv class at the Groundlings, which just happens to be down the road.
A legendary home of comic talent, including legends like Heidi Gardner, Jennifer Coolidge, and my fellow USC alumni, Will Ferrell. The list is quite impressive. So you're in good company, Frank.
Indeed, and I have to say it was very cool. Much more interesting and challenging than I thought it would be. So I decided to go back the very next night and I auditioned for their formal track of classes. And believe it or not, I passed. In spite of me not knowing what the heck a fourth wall is, I got asked back.
Is there a fourth wall in podcasting?
There's not a fourth wall. I don't know.
Or is it just an aura? Anyway, way to go, Frank. We're so proud of you.
Speaking of my issues, since this is going to be also our third rebrand will be Let's Be Frank, and it'll just be about my neuroses and all my issues.
Well, we're very LA now.
We're very LA now. And I have to say, I've come full circle on Mid-City. I didn't really know before we moved here that people from Beverly Hills and West Hollywood and Santa Monica sort of like to make fun of those who live in Mid-City or choose to live in Mid-City. And in fact, I reference a scene from this season's episode of Hacks where Paul Downs, who plays Jimmy in the show.
And he's also the show's creator with his wife, Lucia. Talk about a powerhouse and Hollywood couple.
And Lucia, by the way, is an alumna of the Upright Comedy Brigade in Los Feliz.
So that's next for you. Though I love Los Feliz. Can we move there?
Anyway, there's a scene in Hacks where Jimmy alludes to the fact that those living in Mid-City do not necessarily live up to the idea that everyone in LA is beautiful. Now, I'm going to leave that there. I'm not going to judge one way or the other. I will, but just not on this episode. But when it comes to Mid-City, and there's nowhere in LA more convenient than Mid-City. 15 to 20 minutes, you can be anywhere. Santa Monica, West Hollywood, downtown, the airport. Nowhere in LA is more centrally located. And it's actually one of the only neighborhoods, well, not fair. Santa Monica is very walkable. Venice is very walkable. But it's walkable to anyone.
Like, I kind of think of it as like if you look at a record player, it's like the dot in the middle that holds the record in. We can just kind of go out in any direction and we hit something fabulous. And I also love the architecture. 1920s and 1930s, Spanish style, duplexes and single family homes. But anyway, the good news is we can walk to AOC for their happy hour.
That is a good plan, lady. Okay. On with our interview with artist and friend Richelle Rich.
Yes, we're going to talk about living in LA as a Brit, her feminist art, and the influence of nostalgia. Where you are, where you're from, where you are, and how that influences her work, her quirky dogs, Margaret Thatcher, a blow-up doll, and Frank's friend, Jimmy Kimball. Friend.
Thanks for listening. On with the show, and please don't forget to subscribe. Today, we're joined by the wildly talented, delightful, and always unpredictable artist, Richelle Rich. She's a mother, wife, expat, and creative that makes us feel something, even if we're not sure what.
We first met Richelle at her very cool home in Joshua Tree, and months later brought our Spur members to her Santa Monica studio. Richelle has 2 sons, a very particular dog with a giant personality, a musician husband, and a studio full of stories. And she is turning it all into art. So let's dive in. We mentioned you're an expat. Richelle, tell us, what brought you from the UK to LA?
Well, firstly, I'm going to get right in here, like straight away. The expat thing is tricky, right? Because expat, to me, I feel self-conscious about it because it feels like, you know, British colonialism, the idea of like coming here. And I wonder sometimes about the difference between expat and immigrant. But I think the truth of it is an expat probably is someone that chooses to come somewhere and can choose whether or not they stay. There's like a sense of impermanence to it. So I just wanted to like just put a pin in that bit, I guess.
No, I like that because, and I use the term as we were expats. And then while we were in Hong Kong and they were shutting down borders to the Hong Kongers to China, and there was this whole conversation of, are you an immigrant? Are you an expat? And then everything that was going on with the borders in the US. And so it was an ongoing conversation to be called an expat versus an immigrant.
But the reality is we did choose to come here, and we can choose whether we stay or go. So I guess there is that privilege, but that was the long answer to the question. I guess we came in search of good weather and adventure. But the reality was I never thought that I would leave London. I've been in London since I was 16 and I just loved it. It felt like it was part of my identity. But then we had little kids and we did that thing that lots of us do and think we want a bigger yard and we want, you know, we should go to the countryside. And so we went through the process of looking for a home in the countryside in England. And as it got closer and closer to us thinking, this is where we're going to be, Harry was super excited, my husband, and I just started to get the fear. I was like, I don't know, this is where I was like, I don't know if this is for me. So the place that we were looking at fell through and I just immediately went, hey, how about LA? And so he had some time on his visa from a previous tour he'd been on. And within literally maybe 2 months of having the idea, we were living here.
How did LA shift your creative process?
That's interesting. I don't know if it really did because all the work starts with me and how I relate to stuff. So I feel like the actual process has always been very similar. I'm much more interested in American politics now, perhaps than European politics. But then I think maybe globally that's happening more and more. Yeah, you know, the light in LA is extraordinary. And a lot of the time I shoot photographic work and video. Strangely enough, though, the thing that shifted in the last since I've been here, the thing that shifted is now I'm filming more in England. Oh, okay. So I think what's happened is being 6,000 miles away and 11 years, that finally I can look at England differently. I can look at where I was brought up. So like the piece behind me is this little island where I was brought up in England. But it would never have occurred to me to make work about that space and that place when I was there. It would have been too close. So I think the thing that's interesting for me now is I can really look at it with a little bit more distance and abstraction and safety, perhaps.
You think that those 11 years have given you a little sense of nostalgia as well?
Well, a lot of this new work is about nostalgia and about memory. So definitely, yeah, you're right.
Do you consider yourself, I mean, you're an Angelino, 11 years, you're qualified, but is this home now? Or will you always consider England home?
There, I say, oh, we're going home to LA. And when I'm here, I say we're going home there. I mean, we've always traveled around quite a lot. There was a moment when we evacuated for the fires and I thought we were saying goodbye to all of it, that I had this weird, like simultaneous moment of, it's not important, we'll be okay as long as we're all together, but also like, shit, this is my home. And I think there's been a real sense of community since the fires as well. I've never felt more like an Angelino than I have in these last 3 months, the way that everyone's come together, for sure.
Both can be true, right? Home can be two things at the same time, especially with somebody who's been so connected to two places as much as you have?
For us, it was always home was where our kids are. So, given you're a mother of two and have a great marriage, how do you balance all that marriage, motherhood, and the studio time?
Badly, or I don't know if I do a great job because I'm here and able to talk to you when things are pinging and kids need picking up and stuff. The house is filthy. Full disclosure, that's messy. I'm really messy. Yeah, I think it's more like a really extreme seesaw as opposed to having really much balance. And I also have got very good at making work in scraps of time.
In defense of your mess, I remember walking into your studio and it doesn't feel like a mess. It feels like a creative hot pot.
Because I knew you were coming. I tied it up. I've got the camera like angled at this one little corner around me is like complete chaos.
So what you're saying is what we saw was the cleaned up version.
Was the organized chaos.
Oh yes.
For your work, so you bring in the nostalgia of where you grew up and where you went on holiday. Do your children or your quirky dog or your husband who's a musician, do they play into your work at all?
I think Jessica has a bit of a chip on her shoulder about your quirky dog. Can we give the quirky dog a name?
Merlin.
Like to go through doors, right?
No, and she doesn't like it when anyone else goes through a door either. We got her during lockdown. She was a rescue. And so I was a little bit, I don't want to say bonkers. Harry would say bonkers. I was careful during that first year of lockdown. We don't have family here to look after us if something had gone wrong or someone had got sick. So the dog really didn't see anyone else. No one came in the house for that first year. So she's never quite recovered from that. It was our doing. She's pretty neurotic.
I'm sorry, I cut you off. What was the question that you were asking before?
About how Merlin and the kids and the husband find their way into her work.
Yes. No, but you asked me about Merlin, why she was so, I thought you were asking like why she was so bonkers. So, yeah, they don't. I consider the work to be a feminist political practice. So not necessarily, I'm not editing anything else out of it, but also their anonymity for the kids, not so much the dog, but, for the kids, that's really important to me. I don't want them to be especially visible. Work is just deeply personal, so I'm affected by the fact that I'm a mother and I've done work about being a mother, but I like to think of it as being more universal than about necessarily just my experience of motherhood and my kids.
Tell us a little bit about what you're working on.
Well, the work that's in the background, that was filmed on the Isle of Wight. So it's a small island off the south coast of England. And there's a tiny little figure. I'm going to try and do that sort of there. Oops, there we go. And that's me carrying a giant Mr. Whippy. So for you guys, that would be called, I think, Mr. Softy. And I did this sort of ice cream pilgrimage along these cliffs and then filmed myself carrying it around different sort of sites of my childhood in England on the Isle of Wight. So there's a story about an urban legend or urban myth that Margaret Thatcher was involved in the development and production of soft serve ice cream in England. And it's kind of nonsense, but the Bishop of London actually mentioned it in her eulogy that we should be happy that Margaret Thatcher, created soft serve ice cream. But what she actually did was when she was very young, she worked as a scientist for Lions, which is the company that developed soft serve ice cream for the UK. And she worked on the emulsifier. And so the emulsifier is kind of making it more cost effective, more profitable, less good for you, all of those things. Making it go further. So I kind of like this as a political metaphor. So, it has that sense of nostalgia. Most people have childhood memories about having soft serve ice cream. So the project that you were involved in when you came to the studio with your lovely group of people, and the one that I'm going to be doing in New York, I serve people ice cream and ask them to share a story with me. And I've been doing this for the last sort of year and a half. People come to the studio or I do it on location. I've done it in England and Wales. I did it on the Isle of Wight last summer. I've done it in Joshua Tree. And people come and they share a short memory, and I document it, and I take a Polaroid with a vintage Polaroid camera, and that becomes part of the project.
Politics and feminism are always in the forefront of your messaging. And project that's been going on for over a year now. What will it look like in its iteration in New York? Will there be an installation, or will it continue to be a performance?
Yeah, I'm going to be showing at Spring Break Art Fair. So they're not traditional like art fair booths, but I'm taking the film, which is a 16-minute performance, and that's a still from the film. I have some unique Polaroids, self-portraits of me holding white objects. There's a set of 6 of those. But the main part of it, apart from the film, will be people coming in and sharing stories. And I'm going to have postcards that people can write on, and then they will form a wall and a backdrop to taking some portraits as well of people when they come in and share their stories. And some of them might get some ice cream as well, depending on how many show up. So there'll be the film, there'll be postcards, and there'll be Polaroids.
There's obviously a beginning. We there for the early part of the project in your studio during one of our happenings. Is there an end point? Do you know when this ends?
No, I tend to keep going with projects for quite a while. Historically, I've worked on them for quite a long time. The inflatable doll, I worked with her for about 10 years. So yeah, I don't see an end to it yet. I mean, it expands and morphs into different things. I don't think it will stay the same. But I think as a metaphor and a vehicle to explore lots of different things, I think it has a lot more that I can excavate within that material and the location, for sure.
We walked into your studio and was rummaging around, and there's a picture of you on a lifeguard chair.
Yeah.
With the inflatable doll.
Yes.
And, I'm listening to you talk about your current work, and I want to ask the question, but I didn't. So now is my opportunity.
The doll was called PF, and I was spelling it like PIEFF, like Edith Piaf, but really it was Plastic Friend, because she was given to me, and I had her. I don't think we've ever talked about this, like how I ended up using an inflatable doll. So many, many years ago, I moved up to London, when I was 16. I left home when I was 16, and I went back to college much later. So I had a stint of working in advertising when I was quite young. And something that they used to do back then, which I'm pretty sure we wouldn't do now, is when someone left, the juniors would have to go to a sex shop in Soho and buy a gift for whoever was leaving, right? So that's what used to happen. I used to have to go out and buy a present for someone. Anyway, one of my friends was leaving, and they'd been gifted a sex doll. And they said to me, do you want her? I think actually she was moving to California, and she had this inflatable doll. And she said to me, you work with feminism and objectification, and hey, do you want this doll? So at the time I was doing a lot of self-portraiture, and it was back when we were still using film. And I would literally have the tripod, have a timer, put the camera up, and then run into the shot. So I used to keep the doll inflated in my home, and to make her slightly less obscene, I would put my clothes on her. So I constantly had this inflatable doll literally sat around my home with my clothes on. So it wasn't even especially contrived or conceptual. It was a literal thing. And then, how it is how you talk to your dog? Well, then I used to sort of chat to the doll when I came home.
So did she vote on what you watched on the telly and what was for dinner?
You know what? I'm not even sure. I had a television then. It was just making work all the time. I would put her in the shot to focus the camera on, and then quickly shove her out the way as I jumped in, to do the pose. And occasionally she would get in, and I started to enjoy how she looked and how she photographed. So it was a very natural progression. I would love to say in retrospect, I had this idea and I did this thing, but it really wasn't. It grew. And then so I ended up traveling with her for about 10 years. So the picture that you saw Frank, was in Miami, and it was on a lifeguard tower. And those are actually 3D stereoscopic pictures. So the one that you saw was a print, but you can look through little viewers and see it sort of in 3D. And they were to look like little hotel rooms. So you would peer through the wall and you would see us sitting together.
The fact that you shot that in Miami probably didn't raise that many eyebrows. Like,
You know, I used her all over the place. And I think most people just see what they want to see. They just took no notice. Or if they did, they didn't say anything. I mean, I sat with her on the edge of the Grand Canyon, you know, all over the place. And I don't think I ever had anyone say very much to me at all. I did at one point, there's been a couple of iterations of her because she popped a couple of times. And there was one that I chopped her head off.
as they do. As they do.
I wouldn't know in general use what they're meant to do.
I've learned to get the extended warranty.
A really good repair
I'm
kit.
just not taking it any further. But I did do some images with just using her face as a mask. That's all I will say on that matter.
In spite of the providing for a good laugh, I did find it very, very interesting work. Like going through your photographs there. That's the thing I love about studio visits is you truly get to see behind the scenes of the artist at work. And that's why your studio offers so much of that. It's a museum of found objects and your history and how it all comes together.
It's really okay that she's funny, because I think what that does, a bit like with the ice cream, it gives you an in. You know, it's like the work is actually about something quite serious, very serious. But having that element of humor to it invites someone in and makes them feel able to ask questions. And then I think provokes a conversation. And I think that's true with the ice cream as well. You know, when you give them something sweet, something that was nostalgic and familiar, anyone that wants to, that's kind of an invitation into a deeper conversation. And I think that's the same with the doll. And I definitely had people buy the work and come back to me years later and say, I had no idea what I was buying. I just thought it was sexy and funny. And it has this darker or more serious political feminist subtext to it.
We have always been drawn to performance, especially participatory performance pieces, because I think engaging the audience in art is critically keeping people curious and interested in art and engage in that process. But we also want to support artists. How will you monetize these works?
The video is available in an edition of 3. So the video is available for sale. And then there will be some small postcard size prints that are mounted on aluminium. They're really pretty. They're a set of 6. And I think especially for somewhere like New York, and everywhere, people don't have like massive spaces. And I think historically, I'm always really drawn to lots of artists are giant pieces of work. But there's something about the scale of the postcard I find really endearing. And so I've created these little postcards, and they're an edition of 12 of each image. So they're at a slightly more accessible price point, say, than the Polaroids, which are unique.
Now that you consider yourself an Angelino, do you have any favorite spots in LA that just tickle your fancy?
I love bookshops. So I'm round the corner from Brentwood Country Mart and the Diesel bookshop there. And that for me is bliss, coffee and just browsing around a bookshop. I've got a few favorite galleries that I love. Honor Fraser Gallery is one of my favorites. Ville Meta. Yeah, those are probably my favorite galleries in LA.
And what are you reading now?
Kind of obsessed with Lauren Elkin. So she wrote a book called Art Monsters. And that's one of my favorite books actually in a long time. And then also she's American but lives in London. And there's a British author called Hetty Judah that has written some great books as well. So I'm reading a couple of theirs at the moment.
You've been here for over a decade. So now you have a whole box of absurd LA stories.
You know, I think it's so interesting because if you come here on holiday, you could probably say, I saw this actor and I did this and I did that. But it's so part of the everyday that I'm not even sure I register it anymore. You know, I read lines. My best friend is an actor, so I read lines with her, and I see Harrison Ford at the ice cream shop, and it all just feels normal. You know, for me,
Can I use
yeah,
this
sorry.
as an opportunity to tell my story? Because I think it's a very LA story.
Oh, this is a very LA story.
So we're going out to
well,
dinner.
you do. You just don't know you do. You're too close to it.
We're going out to dinner. It's Jessica and our daughter Dixie and I, and we go to Horses. This was a hot restaurant for a while in Hollywood. We walk in, 9:00 reservation, and the hostess is taking us to our table, and there's a guy coming towards me, and I know he's a friend of mine. I recognize him. I'm not sure how I know him, but I know him. Walking towards him, he's walking towards me. We're maybe a half a foot away from each other and just about to embrace. His arms are out, my arms are out. We're about to do the
bro hug.
man hug. And Jessica stops me. She goes, "Stop. You don't know him. That's Jimmy Kimmel." And Jimmy is thinking the same thing. He's like,
Bald white guy. Is he my agent? Is he my
accountant? So I gave the
Did I play golf with him yesterday?
I gave the quick head nod. We sat down at dinner. Have a lovely dinner. Everybody has a laugh. We're waiting for the valet, and Dixie grabs me. She goes, "Dad, that's Seth Rogen in front of you, and you do not know him." So my problem is, just think because I've seen them on TV that we must know each other. So I'm working on that.
It's a real thing though, right? It's like I sort of find myself thinking, do I know them from the Isle of Wight? Did I go to school with them? And then you realise, oh, it's Brad Pitt. It's
Well, and
really,
then your kids are in school with celebrity
Yeah.
parents, and
Yeah. You know, I did once, when we first got here, get my kids to shake hands with Malcolm Gladwell. Do you know, I like books, I like writers. Yeah, he was very kind.
Did the kids know who he was?
No, but I think I said, this is one of my favorite authors.
Yeah.
Kids, go and say hello.
he's got a big brain.
Yeah, you know, he's smart and interesting. And so, yeah, I did make Malcolm Gladwell shake hands with my kids. And he was very good-natured about it. But apart from that, yeah, authors, I would get funny about. Musicians, perhaps, you know, I would go a bit silly about. Yeah, you know, but there are musicians from when I was younger that I would, you know, like Prince. I actually went to Minneapolis to sort of stalk Prince and flagged my way into Glam Slam, which was the name of his club, with my aunt and my uncle in tow, and told
Hilarious.
them that I worked for NME and got to see a private gig with Prince. I mean, Prince for me was the one.
Speaking of cities and adventures, are there any art cities that you absolutely love that you can't wait to get back to?
London to me is the best art city. It's just part of your life. You're there, you know, you're walking past galleries, you're walking past museums. It's just part of your life there in a way that's slightly different from LA, where you have to kind of go and drive for a while to get anywhere. It feels like a bigger commitment, whereas in London, it just seems to be part of the everyday. That also may be partly because that's where I studied, and so most of my friends were artists, so my social circle was a little bit different, but I think the city is set up in a different way to sort of embrace the arts. Yes.
Back to your art, is there a medium that scares you that you would never dare to work with, or are you open to them all?
I think I'm open to them all. I think painting scares me. I mean, I do paint, and I have a fantasy of locking myself away in the studio for like a year and not letting anyone see what I'm doing and just painting, which I still might do at some point. It's one that I'm, less confident about. But I like doing things that scare me.
Is there an artist that you'd want to, go back and spend a week in their studio with?
You know, when I studied at St. Martin's, my tutor was an artist called Helen Chadwick. She's a British artist, a feminist artist, and she was extraordinary. And she died just after I graduated. So I was at the Royal College. I was still kind of a little bit in touch with her, and she passed away. And I would love to continue that conversation. She was a huge advocate of my work. Her work is extraordinary, and it really paved the way for a lot of other feminist artists. The dialogue around her work is really fascinating. I don't know how well known she is in the States, but I would really recommend anyone that's interested in sort of British feminist art to check out Helen Chadwick. Her work's extraordinary.
Your spirit animal, if it were based on your 3 a.m. brain, what would it be?
A meerkat. You know, the ones that are standing up, going, what's going on? What's going on? What's wrong? What's coming up over there? Yeah, I have anxiety. So 3 a.m. I write at 3 a.m. I do kind of suddenly get like, oh, that's it, streams of consciousness writing. And I'll write on my phone. When Harry's not here, I'll have a book, like a notebook sometimes next to me on the bed, and I'll write without turning the light on, and then it's gibberish in the morning, but I can just about work out what it is. But my brain's quite noisy at 3 a.m. It's quite active. Did you watch White Lotus?
Yes.
Isn't it wonderful that we have a shared cultural experience? It's like, it doesn't happen very often now. When
doesn't.
everyone is like, wait, it's just such a brilliant thing that's, you know, we all grew up, right? That everyone was watching the same thing.
Exactly.
But this is
Who
so
shot
unusual.
JR? Yeah. I
Yeah,
mean,
exactly.
we were all...
My brother is named after JR. His name's Jonathan Rubin, so his initials are JR.
Oh,
I love that you asked that question because it's the collective consciousness. It's what's happening, and everybody was gathered to watch it.
and it was collective escapism too, you know?
Yeah.
And that I think was so fun, and that everyone just hit pause and dove in.
Yeah, right. Did you enjoy it? Had you worked out who it was going to be?
No, I went deep on the tsunami references. So I thought a lot of people were going to die, but it was going to be random and chaotic because he kept on referencing the waves.
I'm sorry, that just takes us straight back to the meerkat brain, doesn't it? Like, I just thought a lot of people were going to die. Total catastrophizing.
Thank you for letting us peek behind the curtain of your studio door in every way, shape, and form.
Thank you so much for chatting with me. I have to say, before I go, everyone that I mention you guys to, when I told them that I was going to be chatting with you, people only have good stuff to say about you guys. And you show up for art, you show up for artists. You're all about building joyful community, and God, do we need that now? And so I'm really grateful to both of you. I think you're wonderful. I think what you're doing is magic, and I really appreciate you. So thanks for having me on.